Okay, it's the WPIAL Blitz Show. My name is Bruce Badgley. Along with me here, my good friend and cohort there, Ian McMeans. Ian, we have a very special guest with us this evening.
We do. We have Tom Reisenweber from the Erie Times News. Tom, I think, is our first guest from the District 10 news media. We had Farrell's head coach on a few years ago before they played a state semifinal game. I think that was against Sarah Catholic that year
Yeah.
that we had the Farrell head coach on. But Tom, thank you for joining us for making the virtual trip a little bit south. But we've got some big games this week between District 10 champions and WPIAL champions coming up in the state quarterfinals. It's
Quarters.
quarterfinals this week, right? Yeah. I get all mixed up here. This whole, 5 and 6A
District
enter in the
quarters.
quarters, the rest of them enter in the semis. It messes me up. Back in the day when it was 4 classes, it was so much easier because like everybody's
Absolutely.
going in at the same point. So at any rate, as we have these state quarterfinal matchups, Erie McDowell taking on North Allegheny, and then Cathedral Prep taking on Peters Township. Can you tell us a little bit about these two teams that the WPIAL teams will be facing off against?
Yeah, it's interesting. McDowell and North Allegheny played, I think, in week 3 this year,
Yeah.
and North Allegheny won by 20 points. And I think it probably could have been a little closer back then, but those two have had a really nice rivalry these last couple, 5, 6 years. They've played a couple times in the regular season, played some very good games in the regular season. But McDowell is they started over from last year. They graduated a ton of starters from last year's team, but they brought back probably the best lineman in the state, and Cooper Cousins, who's a Penn State recruit. They played him at center mostly this year. He's played a little bit of guard, a little bit of tackle based on injuries. But he's basically the focal point of that offense as far as running behind him. Blaze Myers, a junior, took over at quarterback after they had two quarterbacks basically play off and on the last couple of years. But Blaze has basically been a walking 4 touchdown game. He throws for 3 and runs for 2, or throws for 4 and runs for 1 every game. Very athletic quarterback, very good player. They have some receivers on the outside, but their run game has been kind of beat up. Bobby Blue was the big star coming back from last year, and Stephon Porter. And Blue and Porter have missed time with injuries. Blue is still kind of coming back. Porter's been kind of a main guy, and then Dominic Baraducci has been a pretty good running back. So they've had a lot of growing up to do. It's a very inexperienced team this year, but they played a very tough schedule, played a lot of out-of-town teams, a lot of out-of-state teams, and played some very good teams as well. So I'm not sure if they can come down to North Allegheny's home field and win, but they certainly have been playing really well lately. You look at Cathedral Prep, I think they wanted a piece of Pine Richland after last year. They probably should have won that game down in Pine. They had a fake field goal that went awry. Then they had a couple of drives that they probably could have finished and won that game. But I think those players really wanted a rematch, and obviously that did not happen after last weekend. So you're going to see a very run-heavy team out of Cathedral Prep. Their quarterback is Luke Costello. He's actually a Wake Forest baseball commit, along with his brother Andrew Costello, who's only a sophomore. He's also a Wake Forest baseball commit. Not a lot of throwing out of him. They lost a lot of receivers and defensive backs from last year who were really good. RJ Roberts is back. He had a big pick in that game last year. He had a pick 6 against McDowell this year. Very athletic player. But they're mostly just a run team. Suton Lewis and DeShort Hollingsworth, really nice duo out of the backfield. If there weren't some injuries for Suton, you probably both have 1,000 yards this year. Very speedy guys, and they just ran all over Hollingsburg, which is why that game kind of got out of control with how many points he scored. So you're going to see it's kind of two different teams basically Friday night. McDowell's probably going to throw the ball a lot. You're going to see a lot of running out of Cathedral Prep.
Interesting. And I think that actually kind of sets up well for Peters Township, who the last 2 weeks, I mean, their defense has been pretty dominant all year, but the last 2 weeks they faced a Moon team that went to a Wildcat-oriented offense at midseason, and then last week faced Pine Richland, who also went to a Wildcat-oriented offense at midseason and really shut down both of their running games. Now, granted, offensive defensive line play is what really makes a difference once we get into November, and you never really know when you're going to match up how big those dudes are going to be up front when you find, a team from out of district. But Peters Township really dominated the line of scrimmage those last 2 games. And I think them facing off against another run heavy team sets up well for them from a game planning standpoint, because they've seen 2 of those 2 weeks in a row now.
That's gonna be interesting too because Prep they have a pick commit on the line, Giovanni Cooley, and they have a Lamonte Fuller who's got offers from D1. who's probably going to commit to D1 somewhere soon. And then Tim Swanson at center is pretty good lineman. And that's what, when they Cathedral Prep actually played Farrell in week 10
Yeah.
and hammered them. It was basically because of the line. Farrell just couldn't do anything against the line of Prep, and Prep just ran the ball all over him. So that's a very good, interesting matchup, I think, with Prep and Peters Township as the line. Is how big Prep is. It's interesting. Those guys don't really play two ways too much. Aiden Wentz is kind of their star on the defensive line. He's having a great year there. So it's going to be interesting how much those three maybe play both sides because of how talented they are. But it should be a great matchup on the line.
Yeah, and the one thing for me this year, especially about Cathedral Prep, is that there's always been the mystery about Cathedral Prep because they never play anybody from the state of Pennsylvania. They're always playing everybody from all over the place. This year, you really have a connect the dots schedule that you can draw at least some semblance of skill level and talent, that this team has. And that's why I find it, very interesting. I mean, you touched on the fact that it's, a run-oriented team this year where, gosh, up until recently, it's always been, throw it around the yard or very balanced. So, what's really caused, the big change there at Cathedral Prep? It seems like over the last couple of years, they've taken on a new identity, Tom.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot of it's funny because I always knew Mike Mishra to be a big run heavy guy. He loved running just the eye, and just obviously with Bob Sanders,
Sure,
you do that kind of thing. But it was almost like there was a string of quarterbacks that forced them out into the spread, including his son, who threw for
right.
6,000 yards. So I think it was just the personnel that was so good they had to throw the ball, and they had so much speed on the outside on these receivers and defensive backs. You don't want to waste them. And now this year, you look at the personnel they have. Costello can throw the ball, but he's not an elite quarterback with his arm. He's got some touch, but not a great touch to it. And you got those two running backs. You just got to ride them. I think last year, Sutan Lewis came back from a collarbone injury against Pine Richland and had a pretty good game. And with DeShore Hollingsworth stepping up, I mean, in that line in front of him, it's almost like you got to base on your personnel. And Mike Cray has been kind of, I think he's more of a run guy. He was obviously on staff with Mike throughout all those state championships. So I think it's just based on the personnel right now. I know they're excited about a couple of young quarterbacks coming up that maybe throw the ball a little more, but it seems like these last couple of years, they really haven't had that elite passing arm. So they've had to kind of switch and go back to a run heavy team.
Yeah, interesting. Go ahead, Ian.
Yeah. So for Cathedral Prep here, they've obviously not played a ton of Pennsylvania opponents, but they've given up a lot of points this year. So where do you kind of see their strengths and weaknesses on the defensive side of the ball?
Yeah, it was kind of a learning curve, I think, throughout the year with how strong of a schedule they played with some Ohio teams and some New York teams. When they played McDowell, it was ugly because both defenses played so well, and it was 23-13. But Prep gave up a kickoff return for a touchdown to start the game. They had two mistakes on fourth down to give us some points. So they really kind of tried to shore up the defense a little bit. I think linebacker is kind of a key position for them if they show pretty well because the defensive line is pretty big. The secondary's got speed, not last year's speed, but they got some speed. So if that middle, part of the field can play well, the defense is really good. It's just a matter of keeping their assignments and playing the right kind of football. Because I think the defense at times this year has looked great. At times it's really struggled. But the last couple of weeks have really started to come together. And what really, I hate it because it's the state playoffs. They had a week off the first round. Then they play Hollingsburg. They had another week off. And it's just because of this 6-class format. I just don't think we're built for in Pennsylvania. Geography, that's why, geographically.
Yeah.
But
I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
We should do a whole nother show on why we hate 6 classifications. That would be awesome.
And we talk about this all the time on, how can because of the geographic inequities of the 6 classifications, how can the PIAA work to do that? Well, my suggestion was always been, maybe find some at-large teams, okay, from some of the other districts that have a lot. I'm sure there are some teams from District 1 or that would travel across the state or even, District 3 to be a wild card team to make it an equal footing throughout. How do you feel about something like that?
Yeah, I think there's things you can do that I think it's if everyone would agree on it, which I think one is getting rid of districts. You go to the Ohio format, which is regions. Now that means you can take all the WPIAL teams. I think there's 6 WPIAL teams there, 6A, put them in with State College, Mifflin County, yeah, Erie, McDowell. You do either one or two Western regions, and maybe that's the way you solve this. But you got teams like Alderdice. They'll play if they're good. They won't if they stink. Same thing with Brashear.
And I think they need to be penalized for that.
Yeah.
I do. I think that you can't just. What kind of life lesson is that?
Yeah.
That your kids or whatever. Like, yeah, well, we're just gonna like blow it off. I mean,
Well, I always thought District 8 should just fold into the WPIAL. I mean, I know there's a lot of consternation there, but just why is there an 8-team league that has a district automatic berth in a state playoffs in every sport? But I think if we ever got to regions instead of districts, which I don't think we'll ever see, because I don't think the WPIAL will ever give that up. I don't think District 3, I don't think Philadelphia will ever give up districts. If they would just give those up and go to a region format, we'd be better off geographically with 6 classes. Other than that, I think the only other option there is to go back to 4, which I'm a big fan of. But I don't know if that will ever happen because of people are so ingrained in it right now. With there's more opportunities, which I don't understand either. But
participation trophies.
But back to prep having a full week off to get ready for Peters. I mean, that could really help them out. I'm not sure that could overcome their talent, but that could certainly keep in the game in the first half.
Yeah, and Peters has been really balanced this year. They've got a sophomore quarterback who didn't. They had a returning quarterback last year who got hurt early this year, and the sophomore Nolan DeLucia stepped in like in week 0 or week 1, and he's thrown for a ton of yards. They've got like a slew of good receivers. Carter Shanavelt, who's their leading receiver, is also their kicker and punter, and like is a threat on punt returns. The kid's just electric. And then they've got 2 running backs. They can go to either one of them, and they're just like workhorses that can pound the ball. So really it all starts up front for Peters, but they've got a slew of talent at all the skill positions that, if they're not doing something well, they're not SOL, right? They can, if they're not throwing it well, they can turn to the ground game and pound it out. Or if they're not running it well, they can air it out and still have success. So it's been really cool to see them kind of grow as a program too. They made their first WPIAL championship game in 2019 and lost that year by 2 points to Gateway, and then beat Gateway in the semifinals the following year, but got smoked by Pine Richland in the 2020 championship game. And then this year, it all kind of came together for them that they just missed the playoffs last year on the weird WPIAL tiebreaker thing that happens. And then just dominated the schedule this year and ran through it and now claimed their first title in school history. And we kind of saw this with Penn Trafford a couple years ago too, that they won their first WPIAL title in school history, and had all this momentum of let's carry it through and see how far it takes us, because they've never been there before. So why not, go for it all?
It's funny because I've wondered in the last couple of years, I'm like, where's Peter's soccer been? Because I know he's always had a really good soccer program and haven't seen him. And like, he must all be playing football now. So it's interesting to see. I know there's some inexperience there, but we'll see how they kind of translate to the state playoffs. I keep telling people now, we have 5 teams left at D10 in the quarterfinals. This is where you really see some competition in the state playoffs, because there's very good teams coming up here. I mean, I think D10 could go 0-5 on Friday with the matchups they have, but we'll see what happens.
Wow.
Ooh,
really?
Yeah. So tell us more about some of these other ones. I'm fascinated by this.
Well, yeah, in single A, Cambridge Springs, this is their first D10 title in 30 years. They got to go up against Red Bank Valley, who's been great the last couple of years. 2A, Farrell, this might be the game of the night, Farrell versus Westinghouse.
Yeah.
Those two have really gone at it the last couple of years. I think Farrell wants a piece of them. In 3A, Hickory has to play Martinsburg Central at District 6. Martinsburg Central has been great. They've had D10's number the last couple of years at 3A. Then obviously Prep going against Peter Township and McDowell against North Allegheny. I think these are really 5 tough games. Maybe Farrell against Westinghouse. We'll see, but there's a chance. I think that D10 could go 1-5.
That's a really interesting comment. But look, have you been surprised at the depth of talent, across the state in some of the, the lower classifications where really, District 10 is that's their forte?
Yeah, it's been interesting to see the effect on when we went to 6 classes. I know it's been a while, 4 or 5 cycles now, but it seems like the lower classes there's been a separation of the haves and have-nots, but the haves have been great. We had, obviously we had Reynolds over the last 3 years,
Mhm.
winning 10. They had the great talent, and then all of a sudden they had, I think, 4 seniors this year and no juniors. So all of a sudden they go from 3 titles in a row to couldn't even get out of the quarterfinals of the D10 playoffs. And I think that smaller schools are starting to see there's chances here to make a run, but you still have to get past the powerhouses. This is obviously a big deal for Cambridge Springs. I thought Lakeview was going to beat them and get in the D10 playoffs for the first time in a long time, but you still have your Red Bank Valleys in the way. You still have your Westinghouses now, has been great the last couple of years. You still have these smaller schools that are playing really well, but the talent's been great. There's been a lot of really good games this year.
So speaking of the powerhouses, I have to ask. I saw that Farrell's school board voted to potentially rejoin the WPIAL. I know it has to kind of go through the process of it has to go to the PIAA. The WPIAL has to vote to accept it. But do you have any insight at all on kind of what went into that decision? Was it a sort of geography thing? Because I know with 6 classes around here, at least when it started, there was a lot of schools that made decisions to play up because it was a better geographic alignment for travel schedules and kept some of their more traditional rivals rather than having to travel 30, 40, 50 miles away to play conference games.
Well, it's tough because we just got what's called the Steel Bowl back, which is Farrell versus Sharon. Those two are 4 miles apart, great rivalry. They hadn't played in like 10, 15 years, and it was great to see. And Farrell's had great crowds. The stem of the whole thing has been there's been some racial incidents up here over the last like 2 months. Some of them I think I think they're unintentional. There was one where there was a volleyball match where a couple of students from neighboring community, Jamestown, wore sleeping caps. They were called bonnets, and I didn't realize to myself that could be construed as kind of a racist thing, but from way back when. But there was like hearings about these things. That happened. There was an incident at a junior high game. There's just small incidents here and there that the community of Farrell has really kind of gotten sick of. And I keep thinking about this issue. I'm like, I don't know if this is going to be any better anywhere else. I think, he's got to deal with this and try to, it's a learning thing, teach these communities about, different things, how to teach, deal with racism and stuff like that. So all of a sudden there's been 3 or 4 incidents over the last 3 months that D10's had to deal with. And that's kind of sparked this movement to get out of District 10 and go to the WPIAL. And the board was all for it. I know there was a couple of dissenting votes. I think District 10 is going to say yes. I can't speak for that board, but I remember, I think it was like 8 years ago, they tried to leave, and Wally Lucas, who was the chairman at the time, said, no, we told you when you were coming back to D10, you're here for good. So Farrell was shut down right there. Wally's gone now. PIC was in charge of District 10. I think he's a little more open-minded when it comes to that kind of stuff. So I wouldn't be shocked. District 10 meets December 13th. If they approve it, the WPIAL meets December 20th. I don't know where they're at with this whole thing. If they approve it, here's the key part. The PIAA won't be able to approve it until January 24th. So from that time period, if the WPIAL and D10 say yes, you have to kind of risk it because that's a whole huge month of how do we determine our leagues? How do we determine our football schedules? Because new enrollments are going to be coming out for the next cycle. So you can either plan on the PIAA saying yes and going forward and kind of risking it, or you say, well, let's forget about it. It's too late in the process because we are very late in the process for this kind of move.
I got to believe that they're going to do some kind of a straw poll. I would guess, ahead of time to kind of know what the formal vote's going to be before they would, do that. Obviously, the formal meetings are etched in stone, but I got to believe there'll be conversations where these schools are going to know what they're going to do before, the public acclamation of what, whether it's yes or no, I would guess.
Yeah, and you guys know this is a huge period of time when trying to get schedules done for 24. Yeah. Obviously, the WPIAL does a lot of scheduling for their teams. That's not the way it is up here at District 10.
Sure,
was kind of helped out this year. They were in an 18 league, so they had 7 games scheduled for them. They still had to go find 3. They played played Warren Harding. They had to play Cathedral Prep just to find these different games to fill their schedule. And with how much Farrell loses to graduation, I'm not sure they're playing prep next year, even though it's a home and home. So we'll see what happens there. But this is a crucial time of the year when you're trying to lay down your schedule. So for Farrell not to know if they're in D10 or in D7, or the WPIAL doesn't know if they're going to have to include them in a league. It's a lot of unknowns. So it's very late in the process, but we have those 2 meetings in December. They're going to be huge, starting with D10 on the 13th.
The one thing I'll say for the WPIAL, and I have no inside information on this, just kind of, what I gleaned from reading reports and things like that. But the WPIAL, because they schedule out everybody's schedule week 1 through 9, they have a pretty high value on having an even number of teams overall, so that they don't have one random team out there trying to find an opponent. And right now they're at 117 total teams. So having one more to give them an even number that they could schedule everybody out, I think would be a big benefit to them. And I think they would really like that. So regardless of who it is, whether it's Butler coming back, whether it's Farrell coming in, whether it's, one of the teams that went independent in Albert Gallatin or Brownsville or Uniontown, someone like that coming back, I think there's a value to them in having an even number of teams because they like to set the schedules that way. And then they'll be able to have all the WPIAL teams playing against all WPIAL opponents for weeks 1 through 9. So, and Butler's kind of a wild card hanging out there too, that they might be coming back. So we'll see what happens. We could wind up with 2 new teams, and you never know.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up too, because the other thing with Farrell is we don't know what class they're going to be. They've had their 3 transfers this cycle, and they went to the quarterfinals last year, so that gives them 2 points. So if they go to Cumberland Valley this year, they have to go to 3A as one of the smallest enrollments in the state, because that would give them 6 competition points. So there's a chance they could be 3A next year or being 2A.
Yeah, and it was interesting when we talked to the coach last year that they were talking about obviously playing up and how high they were going to play up, and a lot of it had to do with scheduling, with their classification and that. So now going to the WPIAL, I would guess that eliminates that need. Is that they can, well, if they're bumped up by the PIAA, there's not much they can do, but they can actually play a schedule more fitting their enrollment, I would guess.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where they end up. Because the other thing too that people got to realize, it's almost impossible to go down once you move up because of success formula. You have to really stink for an entire cycle with no transfers. You get 1 transfer, you got to stay, and you can't get more than 3 points. So that means you can't get past the first round in the state tournament. And when you win D10, you go to the quarterfinals. So that's why you can't win D10 for 2 straight years if you want to stay. So they could be going to 3A. Just like this fight with Aliquippa that's coming up again, they could be going up. You never know with that situation. I knew last year when they won it and they stayed down, they're going to be going up again. So that's the whole success formula. They might need to tweak that a little bit when they go forward with it.
Yeah, that's another thing. And to me, at least,
that's another show.
Yeah, that's a whole nother show. We should do a roundtable of this, like after the season's over and the new alignments come out, and just to go through it all, because I've got this other crazy idea that the WPIAL and D10 should just break off from the state and have just a Western Pennsylvania championship, and it could work great. But I have a whole spreadsheet where I figured it all out. But
Well, they play football on the field, not on a computer. But it is what it is. Ian, one last question here for Tom. I mean, I tell you what, we have really covered some topics today.
Yeah, we have. So just one other one, going to the North Allegheny Erie McDowell one. Not only have these teams played each other a bit in the regular season over the last few years, but McDowell used to be a WPIAL team back in the day, so there's some familiarity there as well. I think James Connor's senior year, McDowell was a WPIAL team, or junior year?
It was his junior year, and what's funny is Greed kicked McDowell out of the WPIAL, not by the WPIAL, but by District 10, because when McDowell's first year in WPIAL, they went on the road for a playoff game. No big deal. The second year is when they hosted a playoff game, and District 10 figured out, wait, they're hosting a playoff game. We don't get a piece of that. The WPIAL does. No. So Paulie Lucas said to McDowell, "You're staying here now. You're done with that whole experiment."
Yeah, because they were just District 7 for football, but everything else they were D10. And from what I recall, the story was basically like they got told you have to either be D10 for everything or D10 for nothing.
Yeah, all of a sudden D10 made this rule that you had to be a D10 for everything all of a sudden, because one playoff game where McDowell hosted it and the WPIAL got their cut.
That's wild. So I guess my question was going to be, we talk a lot on the show about how it's hard to beat a team twice. And we just saw it with North Allegheny. They got blown out by Central Catholic 50-22 the first time they played them. And they had like 3 turnovers in that game that kind of flipped the game. This time around, they didn't turn the ball over as much and wound up winning 44-41. So do you think the second time around, I know it was kind of a blowout for North Allegheny the first time, but do you think there's some lessons learned for McDowell that they're going to change some things to keep this one a bit closer?
Yeah, I think definitely see some adjustments. I think it will keep them closer in the first half. I'm not sure if they can sustain that, 'cause I think at halftime you're going to see some great adjustments by North Allegheny. So it's going to come down to what happens at halftime. I think it's going to be very close in that first quarter, first two quarters. This McDowell team, they love payback right now. Last year they lost in triple overtime at State College. Last week they blew them out. They were so angry about that. I'm not sure if they have the talent to do that again to North Allegheny after the troubles they've had with them. But I think that the first half should be a pretty good game. The way McDowell, I think it's a good game plan, but you might see some adjustments second half. I think we saw that against Mount Lebanon a couple years ago with McDowell. They kept it very close in the first half. The adjustments came, and then it got ugly. So I think this McDowell team, they're playing with house money right now. No one expects them to win this game.
Yeah.
And they're a very young team, a lot of juniors and sophomores starting. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle things on Friday.
Yeah, I tell you what, we're going to have to get you back on more often, Tom. I don't know how we figure that out, but, it's great to see you, man, other than on the field at the state championships there. It's great talking football. I mean, my gosh, the amount of knowledge you've got about your teams or whatever like that is incredible. Enlightening everybody across the state on District 10 there. Tom Reisenweber, thanks a lot for joining us here tonight, and we'll see you hopefully at Cumberland Valley.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's great seeing you. And anytime you want to talk football, I'm always out for talking any high school sports. So just let me know.
All right,
Awesome.
Tom. Thanks. Just go
Thanks,
ahead and
Tom.
exit out, and Ian and I'll continue on. Thanks, man. See you. Great.
Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Wow.
That was some good ball talk there. That was awesome.
It was good stuff,
Yeah.
and Tom's a great guy. I can't, all these guys that, do this for a living. Okay. I can't thank guys like Tom and, Tom or Bob Greenberg from up that way as well has treated me so well over the years. I'm going to a state championship game for the first time and asking questions of both of those gentlemen, and they're always kind with their time and their advice and everything else. Bob Greenberg is a legend at the basketball championships, and but you could tell, I mean, the guy just like exudes high school sports, doesn't he?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was going to mention Bob as well. Bob mostly covers like the Mercer County area
Sure.
schools, but yeah, both of those guys are some of my favorite guys to follow out of District 10, because like you wanted to start this show because you wanted to learn more about the WPIAL. I've kind of followed the District 10 folks because not only did I go to college at Allegheny in Meadville, so I kind of, have a little bit of knowledge of some of those areas, but also that eventually the WPIAL schools are going to play some of these D10 schools in the playoffs, so I kind of like to keep an eye on how they're doing. And Tom's a great person to follow, very knowledgeable. And
incredible.
he and I have kind of chatted back and forth about our opinions on 6 classes before, so it's all good. But we've got a lot of stuff to get through here tonight.
Yeah, let's go.
So let's go.
And it's cold out tonight.
I like the whole aura that you have going there with the tree and everything. It's very seasonal here. So thank you for joining us on the WPIAL Blitz show. If you're watching, you obviously know where to find us on YouTube. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, our rarely used Instagram account, and all of my WPIAL preview posts on steelcityblitz.com. I'll have very comprehensive breakdowns of the WPIAL championship games that are upcoming here this week. You can check those out at steelcityblitz.com. So we talked about the 6A title game. In a bit of a surprise, North Allegheny avenges their earlier loss this year to Central Catholic and beats them 44-41. NA kind of got a couple turnovers in the game and pulled away and held more or less a back and forth 10-point to 3-point lead for a lot of the second half. Put the icing on the cake with a big Logan Kushner 75-yard touchdown run in the second half. And that dual threat quarterback ability really paid off. He had 6 total touchdowns. And we talked about this on the show last week that, we said, hey, the one game that Central lost this year was against Pine Richland, and they did that Wildcat thing. And with a dual threat quarterback that can take the snap and go with it, it's similar to that Wildcat option. And Logan Kushner ran for 240 yards and 4 touchdowns, just all over Central's defense. And, the other guys on the team also, Kieran Boyd with 107 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns, Tyree Alualu, who's father, Tyson, played for the Steelers, had 105 rushing yards. He's also a pretty good linebacker. And I think the biggest one was North Allegheny outrushed Central Catholic 358 to 47,
Yeah,
which is an incredible statistic. Central tried to keep it close with their passing game. They never backed down. Peyton Wayner kept slinging it and, threw a touchdown pass with, I think, like 30 seconds left and cut the lead to 3, but they couldn't recover the onside kick. So all in all, congratulations to North Allegheny for defending their WPIAL title and winning their second in a row.
And that's the thing, is people forget that they won last year. The reason being is, maybe a little bit of tarnish because they, were defeated by State College. But I think that, there is a big chip on the shoulder this year, Ian, that, to get beyond last year. And that was very evident in this game, in my opinion.
Yeah, you could tell they had that championship experience, that being the defending champions and bringing back most of their team that won the WPIAL title last year. You could tell they had the experience. And the other thing that we talked about last week was Ryan Leemeyer, head coach at Central Catholic, did a great job this year, revitalizing Central's offense, putting in an actual passing game that they kind of never had before. They scored a ton of points this season. It was his first year as a head coach, first trip to a WPIAL championship game. And Art Walker, North Allegheny's head coach, this was his 7th WPIAL title as a coach. He won actually 2 at Central Catholic, and then this is now his 5th at North Allegheny. So Art Walker had been there before, knew what it takes to win WPIAL titles, knows what it takes. He's won state championships before. So, in that experience of coaching, I'm not saying Ryan Leemeyer is not a good coach, because I fully expect him to, be hoisting these trophies very soon at Central Catholic. But in this time around, Art Walker got the better of him.
Yeah, you have to learn that there is a logical progression in everything that you do, and especially football, taking one step at a time. And, but there's oodles of knowledge that's been absorbed by the whole Central Catholic organization now. So, we'll see what happens next year, but kudos to North Allegheny, and boy, they really have got momentum on their side, moving into this week, I think.
They do. You're right. And I think we've talked on this show before about how kind of after that loss to Central, at midseason, they lost 50-22, and they pretty much knew they were the second best team, or not obviously the best team, they won the championship, but they knew it was them and Central were the top 2 teams in 6A. So pretty much the whole focus of the entire rest of their season was, what do we need to do to beat Central Catholic when we play them again? And they obviously learned some lessons. I think that Pine Richland game against Central Catholic was a real eye-opener and kind of gave North Allegheny a blueprint on what they could do. That the go-ahead touchdown run by, or not go-ahead, but the icing touchdown run by Logan Kushner was basically a quarterback run sweep to the right, and they blocked it up so well. I watched the replay about 6 times. I was like, they got a hat on a hat. And, when you run a quarterback draw or a quarterback run, there's always going to be one unblocked guy, right? But the unblocked guy was the defensive end on the far side. So he would have had to come all the way across the formation to get a guy going off tackle on the far side. And everyone else, it was a hat on a hat, and Kushner just had a clear path to go. And I think that was kind of the blueprint that Pine Richland gave them too. So, a lot of things go into it, but North Allegheny now moving on to face Erie McDowell in the state playoffs. So, looking at the state bracket here, we've got North Allegheny against McDowell in the top left. In District 3, we've got Manheim Township against Harrisburg. We've got Nazareth against St. Joe's Prep, and a couple upsets out in District 1 with lower seeded teams advancing as well. The directional school matchup, Central Bucks South beat Central Bucks West, and then Downington West beat Downington East. But looking at my overall rankings, we still have 7 of the top 10 teams are still in the bracket. So, we're moving right along here. Any thoughts on the results that happened out your way this weekend?
Well, Downingtown West beating Downingtown East was, I don't want to say surprise. I mean, it just goes to show you that it's really hard to beat a team twice in the same season, and But I broadcast the Manheim Township Cumberland Valley game. That was not a surprise that Manheim won. Quite honestly, it really was a very close game. And St. Joe Prep's win, not a surprise. Harrisburg, they had a little bit of tussle with Central York, but really were just dominating, on the ground, physicality there. But Nazareth being Parkland, that was a pretty good surprise there. Nazareth really it was a kind of a slow moving game, and the crescendo in the final quarter got the kind of a breakneck situation, and Nazareth came out on top. So a lot of great games, but I think the overriding thing, it's really hard to beat a team twice in the same season.
So I have to ask, because it's potentially the next one looming, how do you break down that Manheim Township Harrisburg game?
Oh my, it's really interesting because I think it's who is going to impose their will on their opponent. Manheim Township wants to open it up. They want to, throw the ball around the yard. I think it's going to be hard for Manheim Township to match up with that Harrisburg physicality, especially on the offensive line. But the Hayden Johnson, the quarterback, I mean, he's really a polished guy. He was under pressure all night, maneuvered around well. He's got a good receiving core, but I think it's going to be hard for Manheim Township to handle Harrisburg physicality up front. And if Harrisburg can kind of control the tempo and keep the ball out of Manheim's hands, it could be Harrisburg.
Interesting. It's good to know. So breaking down this matchup between North Allegheny and Erie McDowell a little bit more, Tom hit on a lot of the key players here for Erie McDowell. One of the things that stood out to me was that Blaze Myers, their quarterback's thrown for 2,600 yards and 32 touchdowns, but he's really kind of spread the ball around to a slew of different receivers. They had like 4 or 5 different receivers with over 300 receiving yards and 4+ touchdowns. That there's not just one guy on this McDowell team that is kind of their lead target. He does, distribute the ball pretty well, at least from looking at the stats. They've got 2 running backs that both have 10 touchdowns on the season, but I think this North Allegheny team, I think you're right, especially after they lost to State College at this point last year in the quarterfinals. They're just crushing everyone on a points per game standpoint, and they've been really, really good in the trenches. That what they were able to do to Central Catholic in the ground game, and just having that dual threat quarterback in Logan Kushner, I think that's the difference maker for North Allegheny in this one. That quarterback that can run or throw, and what they can do schematically with that.
Well, yeah, and I think too. I mean, aren't they playing at North Allegheny?
They are, yeah.
And I think that's the X factor. I mean, just in situations like that, I think if maybe McDowell were playing at home, it might be a different situation because of that. But North Allegheny, I think, playing at home after winning the WPIAL championship, there's no way. I mean, the stars are aligned for them to keep going at this particular point, in my view.
Yeah, I would agree, but I'm biased towards my
I know,
team.
right?
So,
Sure.
but yeah, I really like North Allegheny's chances in this one, especially to pull away in the second half, just because of everything they've done in the second half this year to dominate teams pretty well.
Sure.
And plus, just with history on their side, with Art Walker as their head coach, I think they want to get deep into the playoffs and take a shot at St. Joe's Prep potentially.
Yeah.
All right, on to 5A, where Peters Township did a little bit of everything in beating Pine Richland. The first quarter of this game was close. It was actually 3-2 after the first quarter. And then it started to open up. Peters started to control things in the trenches. Pine Richland was never able to get their ground game going. Peters' defense was outstanding, just as they've been all year. And, we talked about their ability to be multiple on offense. Nolan DeLucia, the sophomore quarterback, 3 passing touchdowns and a rushing touchdown. And then those 2 running backs, Preston Blair and Vinny Sarcone, each had a rushing touchdown. So congratulations to Peters Township on winning their first WPIAL championship in school history. And this kind of, to me, has a vibe very similar to what Penn Trafford did a couple years ago when they finally got over that hump and finally won that first WPIAL title. And with the way this team's playing defense, like they could face up with anyone. I know Imhotep's really good out east, but the way Peters plays defense, the intensity, the emotion they play with is just, I mean, it's been unmatched this year. No one's been able to match their intensity and emotion that they play with on defense. And football's an emotional game, and they play, you know, with their heart on their sleeves and get after it.
I talk about that all the time. You know, obviously, you know, so much is, you know, that you're looking at a goal and trying to achieve that goal and then move on. And that's, I ask this question all the time of coaches. In fact, I asked the same question of Tim Roken, who was our guest on Fresh Set of Downs a little bit earlier, is that, you know, about how does he, you know, manage the emotion of postseason football and manage the emotion of his team. And in this particular case, too, with Peters Township, you know, their goal, hey, winning our first WPIAL championship. Do they have enough emotion left in the tank? You've talked about the fact that it's been an emotional team, that they've spent a lot of emotion into getting to this particular point in the season. I don't think it's a question of skill or physicality. I think it's all about emotions for Peters Township. And can they go where no other Peters Township team has gone before? You know, and I think emotion is what's going to be the determining factor, but that's just me.
I think that's a good point. And I think as we start to look at the state bracket here, Tom mentioned this too, that they're playing a Cathedral Prep team that's only played once in the last 4 weeks, right? That I think, you know, Peters, you're right.
How do you flip that switch back on?
Right. That's the thing, right? Peters may have spent a lot of emotion, but they're in their routine. They haven't had, there's been no bye weeks. They've been playing straight through. They've been doing their work. You know, the weeks are the same since week 0 up through now. They no time off, but once you get into that routine, you can kind of keep getting ramped up on Friday. Sure. Whereas Cathedral Prep, you know, they were off and then they had to play and then they were off again. So how long does it take them to get kind of ramped back up?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that I would consider that to be a real handicap, just as it sounds like you feel it is as well, to ride that emotional roller coaster of you're playing at a high level and you're off. And I mean, how do you flip that switch? I don't know, but you know, we'll see. That's I think hopefully what Peters can guard against. And you know, they have no history. I mean, here's you know, a coaching staff and players that are going somewhere where they've never gone before, and sometimes that's a good thing, you know, and hopefully they can, you know, manage that. But look at all those cross-offs of all these top teams in 5A that are no longer available. It just shows what we've been talking about really all season, is that the 5A classification is wide open in the state of Pennsylvania for a team that really just wants to grab it by the throat and take hold.
I agree. And I think the other thing too is that we had 2 matchups of top 5 teams this past week. That we had Peters Township and Pine Richland, who were 1 and 3, and then Imhotep and Roman Catholic that were 2 and 5. So, you know, those top teams, I mean, we had 2 matchups this week that arguably were good enough to be state semifinal caliber matchups. You know, like I mean, be honest here. If Roman Catholic had beaten Imhotep, like they'd be pretty heavily favored against Delaware Valley this week, and you'd expect them to, right? That like they were, and that was a close game too, from what I saw. Like they were,
they scored
better
like
than
the last under the last minute there, I believe. And that to win that game. I think that was with like 36 seconds left, Imhotep won that game. So a winning touchdown.
Right. So you know, history will remember that Roman Catholic lost in the first round of the state playoffs, but they were probably, you know, if you ranked all the teams, a team capable of, if the bracket was distributed differently and not distributed by districts, you know, a team capable of potentially, you know, being a semifinalist caliber team.
Playing Peter, you know, playing the the Western bracket champ at Cumberland Valley, clearly.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just that they faced off against the top team in their region very early.
Yeah. Yep. And I think that's a lot of what we saw here, that, Peters, Pine Richland, Penn Hills all being ranked in the top 6 out of the WPIAL, like only one of them was going to even get to the state quarterfinals, just because of how the brackets are all set up. So we'll see what happens. I think, there was a couple little upsets out there in District 3, right? Cocalico and Ephrata.
Cocalico, I tell you what, not really an upset that they beat Cedar Cliff.
Cedar Cliff was seated higher, though, weren't they?
They were,
yeah,
absolutely.
okay.
But Cocalico, I mean, they made the states. They played Pine Richland in the state semifinal last year after going in as an 11th seed into the District 3 tournament last year. So you don't want to sell those guys short. In fact, they lost their first game and have gone on a tear since. Ephrata, the feel-good story of District 3 football this year, somewhat of a downtrodden program, has just basically risen up. In fact, there was a lot of controversy because Cocalico and Ephrata are playing for the 5A championship. The game sold out, like it sold out on Sunday afternoon. There are parents of players that can't get tickets to the game. Wow. And there's all this, District 3 is like getting, all these, tough phone calls because they want people to move the game to a larger stadium, and so that people can actually go to the game and that. So, but anyway, just some of the stuff that's going on around here. But I think the team, quite honestly, Imhotep Charter has to play Delaware Valley. I mean, literally, it's like you're going from Philadelphia all the way to like the Pennsylvania, New York border. I mean, it is a real road trip. Let's hope they can, survive that. And that's the whole thing about emotion. Okay. Their emotional game was getting by Roman. The trap game that they have this week is this long bus ride all to the top of the state of Pennsylvania to play a Delaware Valley team that, you hope that they can, muster enough emotion to play, because physically and talent wise, they should emerge victorious.
Yeah. So one note and then one question here. Based on my tracking of the state playoffs, officially defining these state playoffs as the round of 16 here.
Sure.
This is the first time that Chester's ever appeared in the state playoffs. Yeah. So that's kind of a cool story out of District 1. My question, though, is back to District 3. And we've been doing this show for a few years now. It seems like, other than the first year we did it when Governor Mifflin kind of ran the table, that there's always been some kind of weird upset, feel-good story come out of District 3 and 5A. That a couple years ago it was Exeter Township, that no one had ever they
beat a very favored Governor Mifflin team to make it to the state semifinal, and
then it was Cocalico, and now it was what Cocalico beat Exeter in the District 3 finals last year,
correct.
right?
Then Exeter was the favorite team, and Cocalico, comes and beats them, and now this year it's Ephrata, coming out of nowhere.
So there's almost been these handoffs that it went from Governor Mifflin that they lost to Exeter, and then Exeter lost to Cocalico, and then
it's a wild scenario here, and but 5A is always a lot of very evenly matched teams across a pretty big district. I mean, I think there's like 95 teams in District 3. I think there's like 18 or 20 teams, 5A teams in District 3 there, spread out amongst, a wide area. So, things can really happen. And the more that, there's not a lot of crossover play anymore either, because of the conferences are getting so much bigger, so that it's easier to schedule. So these teams don't have a chance to really measure themselves against non-conference teams much anymore. So, it leads to a lot of surprises, which is what we're seeing, and obviously it surprises you.
Yeah, yeah, and just watching from afar how I've noticed it. So
It's
talking a
fun.
little more about this quarterfinal matchup between Peters Township and Cathedral Prep, I think the biggest thing that I took away from what Tom said was how Cathedral Prep is really so run heavy and run oriented, and especially basically wanting to do work on the ground, and how good Peters has been at defending the run this year. To me, I think that's where the game gets decided. I mean, every game gets decided up front in the trenches, but sometimes turnovers make a difference, things like that. But I think really, if Peters can stop Cathedral Prep's running game like they've stopped Pine Richland's running game, like they stopped Moon's running game, like they stopped every other running game they faced this year. Peters is only holding teams to like 7 points a game. Like that's insane. So obviously history's kind of on the side of Cathedral Prep here. Peters just won their first WPIAL championship. I have a asterisk by their quarterfinals record because those 2019, 2020 WPIAL championship games, those years the WPIAL champ entered at the state semis. So those games were technically state quarterfinal games. But nevertheless, this is their first time like venturing outside the WPIAL into a state playoff game. And they have to travel up to Erie for this game too, which could make a difference because from the South Hills of Pittsburgh, like actually, Peters is the first school into Washington County. So that's even south of Allegheny County.
Yeah.
That's a long
That's a
trip
long,
up to Erie.
It is a long trip.
Probably
Yeah.
2.5 hour drive, probably. So
Yeah.
maybe 3.
Yeah, I've traveled this state. I mean, I was a sales guy, and so when you talk about all of that, I've made the drive from Washington up to Erie and everything like that, and that's that's tough. That's why I talk about that long bus ride for Imhotep, and the same thing after Peters. Like I said, that's that emotion thing. Here's a long bus ride that you got to take, against a good opponent after an emotional win, and you've never done this before. Now, if there's a time for an upset, do you think that might be it, especially with a run heavy team that can maybe, hold the ball from you and might test, your patience on offense and test your skill? I don't know. Quite honestly, I think if there is an upset in 5A, this week, it could be this one, just because of the reasons that I said. Not that I'm picking it, but I could see where the opportunity might be there for Cathedral Prep.
Yeah, I think the one difference in the travel here this week is that since it is Thanksgiving week and they have Friday off school, that there's a little bit of opportunity
even
to
more distraction.
Yeah, well also, I mean, they'll practice Thanksgiving morning. The teams around here always do. But I think there's that opportunity to, potentially leave early in the day, get up there, get situated, get in your rhythm so you're not, driving up there and just kind of pulling up to the stadium, getting out and playing the game. That, you get there early and can kind of get situated and get familiar with the atmosphere a little bit more.
It was really interesting, and he just kind of threw this thought in my mind here or whatever like that. One of my Thanksgiving traditions is going to Thanksgiving Day practice with teams. Thankfully, we've had that here, in Reading over the last few years, and obviously Wyomissing has been one of those teams, and I've been there a lot. But I'm gonna have to rethink. I might have to do some calling on some coaches or whatever like that, and see what their practice schedules are. I know that one year when Cocalico, with my buddy Dave Gingrich, when he was coach and they made it to a state semifinal a couple years ago, I went out and was at Thanksgiving Day practice out of Cocalico, and we've got a couple teams in the area, that are driving distance for me. I might have to check out a couple teams here because that's my Thanksgiving Day tradition, is like going to football practice. I mean, it's incredible. It's just an incredible time and incredible. It's a practice, but it's also a celebration.
Mm-hmm.
A celebration, especially now with the season starting earlier. If you're playing on Thanksgiving, boy, you've really done something and need
Yeah.
to be proud and need to celebrate and obviously be thankful. And so that's my Thanksgiving Day tradition. I'm gonna have to figure out where I'm gonna go. I didn't, this kind of snuck up on me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Go MVP doesn't really sneak up on anybody because they are in your face. They will work with you in getting your presence out there in ways that you are just mind boggled at. Ian and I have said all year long, what you've got to do is to just go to GoMVB and look at their Twitter feeds and look at their Instagram and go on their website and look what they're doing for the athletes that are affiliated with GoMVB. And all I saw this week, Ian, and actually the last couple of days, what's the headline on players is, I think all these PSAC players that are like entering the transfer portal. I mean, and all these, the amount of college players that are in the transfer portal now, it just like blew away all of the high school players who are, trying to get noticed. How can you compete? Go to GoMVB. It is a public relations firm geared around athletes. And that's all they do. They will create your online persona and they will get it in front of college coaches. Go to gomvb.com/SSM special. We got some great rates and get yourself noticed by college coaches, right, Ian?
Absolutely. And college coaches are definitely out there scouring Twitter looking for players. I had a college coach of a FCS level program DM me the other day and said, hey, I grew up around Pittsburgh. I'm coaching elsewhere now, but are there any kids out there that you think fit kind of this mold that we're looking for? So I sent him a couple that I had seen, but that's why I'm always like, hey, tag me in your highlight videos.
Yeah.
I'll try and retweet them because you never know who's looking, and it's always good to put your best foot forward and best face out there for potential college recruiters, because a very small percentage of high school players even get college offers, and then an even smaller percentage go on to play in the NFL. But if you can get free college education or discounted college education, regardless of where, I mean, that's life-changing. So I'm happy to help, share things when I can. And it's, all about trying to promote the kids and, get opportunities for them to advance themselves in their future.
One of the fun things for me, and obviously we're talking here about GoMVB, but one of the fun things for me is when I see these guys that I've covered in high school, and I've seen quite a few of them here this year, again, on the field, playing Big Ten football or playing against Big Ten teams, and that's a lot of fun. And these are guys that they've gotten free education from their athletics, and GoMVB and other methods are what players and families need to utilize. If you think that, and I'm just being honest, is that if you think that you're doing a good job on your own, you need help. You really need some help, and GoMVB is one of those services that can really help you get noticed.
Yeah, and we thank them for their support of us all year. We kind of use this little advertisement break as our segue between, the 5 and 6A that the WPIAL championships just happened, and we're moving into they're moving into the state playoffs versus now moving into the 4A through 1A classifications, where we are talking about semifinals that just happened and WPIAL championship games that are upcoming this week at Acrisure Stadium. Can't call it Heinz Field because Heinz Field is in Aliquippa now. Shout out to all of our Aliquippa folks who watch the show. We love your support.
John Nagel. Yes, John Nagel was our Aliquippa buddy here. So
yeah. So speaking of Aliquippa, they had a big win against Mars this week. The game score was even closer than the actual game was. Mars scored 2 late touchdowns after Aliquippa put it into the mercy rule and ran away with it. Tyke Hayes with 230 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. Harrison Walker and Cam Lindsey both with 2 touchdown nights. So all around, just a great performance for Aliquippa. And they've got so many guys that can beat you in so many different ways that defending them is just so difficult that they're just loaded at the skill positions, and that's where they win this year, is at the skill positions. On the other end, McKeesport put a spell on Montour, literally, with the brothers Keith Spell and Keemon Spell.
Oh my God. Good stuff, man. I love it.
I had that one in the bank.
I must be rubbing off on you, man.
It's all good, So Keith Spell is a senior, and he's just like a truck. Like, he is a load. And he came in kind of mid-season and had a couple big games for them. And McKeesport's offense is really taken off, but he did it on both sides of the ball. He had 190 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns, and then 4 sacks on the defensive side. Like, he's just a force right now to be reckoned with. And that's not to take anything away from Anthony Boyd, who's McKeesport's leading rusher. I think he ran for 87 or 90 yards in this game too. But I mean, Keith Smell's just been a force in this for this McKeesport team. And then his younger brother, who's a freshman, last week returned a missed field goal, 100 yards for a touchdown, put up 136 rushing yards and a touchdown in this one. And, Montour just couldn't stop McKeesport's ground game. And with that triple option that McKeesport runs, once you turn the ball over, it's going to be 5 or 6 minutes before you see it back, because they're just going to, plod their way down the field. But they've got guys like the Spell brothers, like Anthony Boyd, that can take it to the house. So we've got an excellent rematch here. I guess these two have never met for a championship, but they've met each of the last 2 years in the semifinals. So we get Aliquippa McKeesport for the 3rd straight year. Both of these teams can score. Aliquippa can do it either on the ground with Tyke Hayes or through the air with Quentin Good throwing the ball. And they've just been able to be so multiple with all the talent they have at the skill positions. Whereas McKeesport, they're gonna ground and pound you to death with that triple option that they run. And McKeesport's been great in the trenches this year. And that's the one place where Aliquippa isn't quite as good this year as they were in past years. They're still really good. Don't get me wrong, but those, 300-pound linemen that were the trench dogs pretty much have all graduated now. And the guys who replace them are good. They just don't average, more weight than the Steelers' offensive line anymore. So, you saw those guys play the last couple of years in state championship games. They were huge. And, they're all off to college now, which is great for them. But at the same time, the guys that have come in are also good, but they're just not as big. So Aliquippa is going to have to win on the outside. They're going to have to win by being multiple, by keeping McKeesport's defense off balance with both running and throwing the ball. And McKeesport just has to win in the trenches and grind them to death, basically. But these two teams have been the two dominant forces this year in 4A. McKeesport's only loss was to Bell Vernon, who's the defending 3A state champs and playing in the 3A championship game. And that loss was in overtime, where McKeesport went for 2 in the win and didn't get it. So, both teams can score, both teams can play defense. This is shaping up to be an all-time classic.
And I think that, McKeesport has a really good shot, and for a lot of the same reasons that you touched on. For some new guys there that are up front, I think that what you've got to have are athletic bigs on the front line there. And I don't know if Aliquippa has the same level of athleticism up front as they've had in a couple of years past. And I'm really interested to see how they're going to match up against this McKeesport running game, and whether they can play discipline too. You can't get out of your gap responsibilities when you're running, when you're playing against a team like McKeesport. So how disciplined and whether they can really hang athletically up front there is going to be the key for Aliquippa, I think, against McKeesport.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely going to be an interesting one. And I think you're right. I think turnovers is the big factor here, that if Aliquippa turns the ball over a few times, it's just so tough to get the ball back from McKeesport because they just execute so well in that triple option. They're handing it off to various players. They're just grinding their way down the field, and they're big enough in the trenches and have a power back in Keith Spell. They have that speedy freshman in Keemon Spell. They have Anthony Boyd, who's just a great all-around runner. I mean, he can break off a 90-yarder, which he did against Thomas Jefferson, or he can, just get 3 yards in a cloud of dust. So
Sure.
they can do it in the trenches.
Yeah.
Aliquip is going to have to do it with their passing game.
This one's going to be a lot of fun. It really will be an incredible game, and
and
it's hard to say it's the top game in the state because there are so many great games now, but this one sure has my attention.
Yeah. I would say if this isn't the best game in the state, then Farrell Westinghouse probably is, and then this is like 1B. Like it's 1A, 1B to me. Those are the two I think that really got my attention this week. The other subplot to this is these are probably two of the best like trash talking fan bases around. So there's probably gonna be some words exchanged on the WPIAL Facebook groups this week. But it's all in good fun.
It's all in good fun. Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you, that's had a little chat here. Thanks for John Nagel chatting it up, with us and what have you. I know that it got very interesting in the chat on the Fresh Set of Downs a little bit earlier. So
yeah. The other thing I'd like to mention too is that these two teams are two of the top 10 winningest teams in WPIAL history. Aliquippa has now pulled away from Jeanette as having the most wins of all time in the WPIAL, but McKeesport is hanging in there in the top 10, and Beaver Falls also. And actually, you know what? Now that I think about this, I think I might have McKeesport's number wrong because this is what I had on my spreadsheet. But I remember earlier this year, they had a tweet that they won their 700th game in school history. So I need to double check this one on McKeesport. But Beaver Falls also in a WPIAL championship game. So we've got 3 of the top 8 teams, in the WPIAL all-time victory list playing for championship games.
Wow.
So that's still pretty cool.
Good stuff.
And statewide, we have the WPIAL champion up here at the top left of the bracket. They'll face the winner of Juniata and Selinsgrove in the state semifinals next week. And you've got a pretty good one between McDevitt and Manheim Central coming up this week for the District 3 title.
That's our Penn Live broadcast game this week. Will be a rematch of the District 3 championship, McDevitt and Manheim Central. I think it's going to be a lot closer. McDevitt won last year's game 40-0. I think it's going to be a lot closer. I think Manheim Central, Bryson Arnold went for over 300 yards and 6 touchdowns last week against Twin Valley. So I think if Manheim Central can somehow keep a semblance of a ground game going, which they couldn't put on a McDevitt last year, it could be a real barn burner. So that's the game I have. And, I guess the team that, Selinsgrove is, kind of the dark horse here without all this. But, don't forget, Dallas and Bonner play as well, which is going to be very interesting too. So, a lot of good stuff here in the 4A bracket.
Yeah, Bonner with a little bit of an upset over your Pope John Paul team that you like.
Yeah, like 6 turnovers. You can't win if you're, can't hang on to the ball.
Yeah. All right, on to 3A, where Bell Vernon beat East Allegheny for the second straight year in the playoffs. Last year it was in the quarterfinals. This year it was in the semifinals. Bell Vernon did it on the ground. Quentin Martin, Jake Gedico, and Cole Doppelhauer all put up big days on the ground for Bell Vernon as they get back to the WPIAL championship game once again, and they will have a rematch against Avonworth.
Wow.
And Avonworth slugged it out with Elizabeth Forward back and forth. And Andrew Kubin, who is our player of the week in our Go MVP player of the week back when Aliquippa knocked off Central Valley earlier this year, for his big performance in that one. He's done everything this year for Avonworth. He's run the ball. He's been a receiver. He even threw a pass on an end around this time. He's played safety for them and had a number of interceptions this year. So he's done it all for Avonworth, and Avonworth's a very well-rounded team. Their quarterback Carson Bellinger's been really good this year. They've got a good ground game. They've got a couple like Bucknell and FCS level commits that are on that team. But Bell Vernon, I mean, they're just a force.
Wow.
Quentin Martin's going to Penn State. Their quarterback, Braden Locks, who's actually thrown the ball quite a bit this year, is going to Eastern Michigan to play tight end because he's got that kind of size. But I mean, these are, scoring wise, defense wise, they're the top two teams in 3A, and we get a rematch of the championship game. And I think that rematch factor is going to keep this one a bit closer. Last year it was a 24-7 game, but the real difference was Quentin Martin returned a punt for a touchdown and had a big run for a touchdown. So 2 plays really swung that game last year. I think this one's going to be close. I think it's going to be tight. And I think Avonworth's been looking forward to this potential rematch with Bell Vernon all year. So this should be a good one. But I like Bell Vernon's chances being the defending WPIAL and state champs, but don't count out Avonworth either, because they've had their eye on this and they've scored big wins all year. And I think the big factor too is how many close games both of these teams have played, right? Avonworth beat Central Valley, who's a very good 4A team. Bell Vernon's non-conference schedule, they played Penn Trafford, who's a 5A team who made the playoffs. They beat McKeesport. They lost to Thomas Jefferson at the very end of that game. So they've played tough opponents from higher classifications. Both these teams have, and both these teams have won close games this year. Sometimes when you see these teams that are so dominant, they've never played a close game and they don't know how to react when they get in a close matchup. But both of these teams have played and won close games, and they're battle tested against teams from higher classes as well.
And here's this emotional factor again, okay, where Avonworth is trying to get over the top. Everything for them is getting this WPIAL championship, okay? Bell Vernon, it's beyond a WPIAL championship. I mean, obviously defending, state champion, where their sights may be a little bit further down the road. So, they better be, what do they say? Object in your, in your side view mirror or larger than they appear. And I think that's Avonworth in Bell Vernon's side view mirror here. This is going to, as you said, this is going to be a very close game. And I think it's going to be, a lot closer than what people give credit to. And I think that it's, emotions is what's going to carry it here. And I'll tell you what, Avonworth, they would get my check mark on the emotional side.
Yeah, and I think speaking to what you said about, Bell Vernon having their eyes further down the road, for a lot of this season, they kind of limited Quentin Martin's touches. And obviously when you have a guy like that who's a Penn State commit, but a lot of games he was only getting like 10, 12 touches a game versus, they really worked in some of those other guys, Anthony Cruz, the Cole Doppelhauers, the Jake Gedicos of the world, worked in, and all those guys got work too, but that also makes them a very well-rounded and balanced team coming into the playoffs. But now Quentin Martin's a bit fresher coming in too, because they've saved his legs for the postseason. So yeah, I think that's a factor as well. Looking statewide, my rankings definitely like these 2 WPIAL teams, and why I'm missing in Danville. Other top 5 teams will face off this week. Newman Goretti, the defending runners-up, went down to Scranton Prep last week, so going to be an interesting to see how the right side of this bracket plays out here if YO gets by Danville again, if they can get back to the state championship game for what, the 3rd time in 4 years it would be.
Really high level of competition here. Northwestern Lehigh is not chopped liver either, my friend. They're very good. And that why I'm missing Danville game, that is really going to be, Danville has come very close a couple times in beating why I'm missing. The last time was in Danville. So they're playing actually here in Reading over at Albright College. So that it's going to be I think a lot closer than what people think. So but you're right. I think that we almost have like state semifinals going on, East and West, to determine the favorites that would be meeting at Cumberland Valley.
Yeah. All right. In 2A, Steel Valley got a bit of a challenge from Mohawk, but once again, it was Donald Barksdale who stole the show for Steel Valley. He had 4 total touchdowns, 257 yards on the ground and 2 touchdowns, a pick 6 on defense, and threw a 74-yard touchdown pass as well. Steel Valley back in the WPIAL championship once again, and they will face Beaver Falls.
Wow. You okay?
Yeah, I had to cough. I didn't want to blow your ears out. Beaver Falls beat Washington in a game where Washington had 3 defensive touchdowns and Beaver Falls just kept battling back. Detallion Buford had 128 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns and scored a 2-point conversion in the third quarter that wound up being the game-winning score for Beaver Falls as they held off Washington. And now Beaver Falls is the number 10 seed, makes it to the WPIAL championship game for a rematch of last year's championship game. And these two, since we went to 6 classifications in 2016, have really been the dominant forces in 2A. Beaver Falls just moved down to 2A in 2020, but they've made the championship game every year since they moved down in 2020. And for Steel Valley, this will be their 5th championship game appearance of the 6 classification era. So 5 WPIAL title games in 8 years is
that's pretty incredible.
Yeah. So speaking of Beaver Falls, here's another interesting one as a 10 seed. Double-digit seeds have never lost at Heinz Field Acrisure Stadium since it opened in 2001.
What an incredible stat that is.
Yeah. So 10 seeds and above that have made WPIAL championship games have actually all won them since 2001. So that's kind of a wild one.
My God.
And I mean, like, even last year when we were talking about this, no one expected Union to do what they did to Bishop Canevin. So,
sure.
History is actually on Beaver Falls' side here. And Steel Valley beat them in the WPIAL finals last year. So there's that, rematch of emotion that comes into play. And yeah, I mean, Steel Valley is the defending WPIAL champs, but Beaver Falls has been to this stage too. And, Beaver Falls got that number 10 seed because of they were 5-5 entering the playoffs, but that 5-5 record was a bit deceiving for Beaver Falls because 4 out of their 5 losses were by 10 points or less, or by single digits, basically. So they were in all of their games, and a couple of them were games where they lost by like a point or 2. They lost to Neshannock by a point in overtime. So they'd played a lot of close games, and now they've just come out on top of these close games in the postseason where they lost them in the regular season. So Beaver Falls is on a hot streak here. I wouldn't be shocked to see him win, but Steel Valley with Donald Barksdale, I mean, when you have an electric player like that that's putting up 4 or 5 touchdowns every time he steps on the field, that's a force to be reckoned with. And I don't know if Beaver Falls can stop Donald Barksdale.
Hard for me to imagine that Beaver Falls is going to pull off that upset, despite the stat that you just said about the double-digit seeded teams that don't lose at Acrisure Stadium. That's just mind-boggling. I just don't see them beating Steel Valley.
I think it's going to be a good one. I think it's going to be closer than last year. And Beaver Falls, the last couple of years, what's been their downfall is turnovers in the championship game. That game against Sarah Catholic a few years ago, I think they had 9 turnovers in that game. And turnovers have kind of been their downfall at this stage the last few years. And looking statewide, the WPIAL champ here will play the winner of Westinghouse and Farrell, which if it's not, as Tom said, probably the game of the week statewide, if you're not counting district championship games. But, looking holistically, it's either that one or the Aliquippa McKeesport game is probably the best game in the state. Westinghouse put it on Central Clarion last week, which was an unbeaten Central Clarion team that had been outscoring opponents like 650 to 99. And then Westinghouse put up like 46 on them last week. So Westinghouse is just outstanding. And Farrell's a really good team too, although they had a tight one against Mercyhurst Prep that they had to get by to even get to this point. And then Southern Columbia once again won the District 4 title. They got by Mount Carmel and Troy. So they probably will have a pretty easy run here the rest of the way to get back to the state finals.
That's 9 in a row for Southern Columbia. 31 out of 33. Are you kidding me? And that's over 1A when it was 4 classifications, 2A when it was 4 classifications and 6 classifications. I mean, it's just a level of dominance that is just incredible. And I guess the playing with house money award in the PIAA tournament right now goes to Camp Hill. I don't think there's any lower team than Camp Hill at number 26 that's still playing. So, but they've had a great run. And I think that they've got a good shot to win this week.
And I will say, because I have to, Southern Columbia's run is impressive, but they have, won 5 straight state titles now and been allowed to stay in 2A by the PIAA, despite the success formula saying
I have no idea what fuzzy math's being used there, but
so to me, they should be at least in 3A, maybe in 4A, which may make a slight difference. Although, as we've seen with Aliquippa, it hasn't made a difference. Aliquippa's made 16 straight WPIAL championship games. So being a 1A size school playing up that high. So we'll see if this is the year that Southern Columbia finally gets forced up or not.
Well, and look, I think that the to your point is that when Southern Columbia played, had Wyomissing go play, and Wyomissing beat Southern Columbia at Southern Columbia in a regular season game a couple of years ago, pretty handily. So, and we see there's a reason why there's 6 classifications, and that's the same thing. Let's just talk about Central Valley. Okay, that was, won consecutive 3A championships, and now in 4A is just another face in the crowd, right?
Well, I mean, they made the WPIAL championship game last year and, made it to the quarterfinals this year.
Yeah, but a face in the crowd of the state. I mean, maybe not necessarily in the WPIAL, but they're not at this particular point, having moved up into the level of competition they've got in 4A. I mean, it's a mosh pit of really outstanding teams.
Yeah. Well, I think look what happened to Archbishop Wood, right? They dominated 5A for a few years, and they've been a pretty much non-factor in 6A. So, but I mean, that's the formula that the state's put into place with the success formula, and Southern Columbia's had more success than anyone and hasn't had to move up. So,
yeah, interesting. Yeah, I don't know how that works. So,
all right, on to 1A. Where the top 2 seeds, the 2 undefeated teams,
Clairton goes down.
And here's what happened. Here's what happened in that game. So last week on the show, we talked a lot about once you get to this point in the playoffs, there's tape on everything you do. You got to try and do something different, right?
Yep.
Southside Beaver is a wishbone, triple option, run the ball kind of team. They ran these play action bootlegs with their quarterback, Brody Almashi, rolling out and throwing the ball, which they hadn't shown all year on tape. They'd never done it all year, and Clairton just wasn't prepared for it and couldn't defend it. And AC Corfield had a big game, 3 receiving touchdowns, 131 rushing yards. He's an underclassman too. He's only a sophomore or a junior. Wow. I think he might be a sophomore. But they did something different, and it paid off for them, and it was what they needed to do to beat Clairton. And that was the real difference in the game, that Southside came out and threw the ball in a way that they'd never thrown it before.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, Matt Sieg made, we were talking about Matt Sieg actually in the press conference at the Penn State game. So
I'm telling you, this kid is incredible. I mean, I think
were all at, one was a talent evaluator and everything else. He was the guy that we were talking about, like I said, in the post-game press conference. Well, it was after James Franklin was talking, but
right.
We're talking about Matt Sieg.
You should feel pretty smart. We've been talking about him since last year on this show when he was a freshman. And Yeah, I mean, I think earlier this year I called him the Shohei Ohtani of the WPIAL just because every week it seems like he does something that you've never seen before, or like haven't seen happen in 100 years. And it's just like, what he's doing is unprecedented for a sophomore to be putting up these kind of
Well,
numbers is just insane.
the topic of the conversation wasn't necessarily whether Matt Sieg was a good player. The question was whether he was going to play quarterback at the next level. And that was, there were differing opinions on that. I felt that I felt he was going to take the opportunity that he could play quarterback, and he's going to have opportunities all around there. But it is what it is.
Yeah. I mean, he can fly. I mean, that's just he's a track star too. He can fly, and that's what makes the biggest difference, and really sets up this showdown. I think it's our only WPIAL championship game between two undefeated teams,
yeah.
And these have been the dominant teams in 1A this season. Top ranked in offense and defense. The top ranked offense going against the top ranked defense. Very similar statistically. Fort Cherry has never won a WPIAL title as Fort Cherry. They were formed by the merger of Midway, McDonald, and Hickory, I think. So Midway won a WPIAL title back in 1956, but since Fort Cherry was formed, they've never won a WPIAL title. Southside's last WPIAL championship was in 1999. They did make it to the 2018 championship game where they lost to Steel Valley in 2A. But Fort Cherry hasn't even been to this point since 2001. But if you remember back when we interviewed Tanner Gary, their head coach, a couple of years ago, he was a quarterback back in the day for Fort Cherry and talked about, the memories of that 0-1 championship game and whatnot. So there's some experience there that, he remembers that game, and they lost to Rochester in that one. But nevertheless, these are the two teams that have been the best 1A teams this year. And I can't wait for this one. The 1A game's always super fun because it happens at like 11 a.m. and you wake up, you eat breakfast, you turn on the TV. It's the day after Thanksgiving,
man.
It's the day after Thanksgiving. So you're like, you have pie for breakfast and you start to get out your Christmas decorations and put up the tree and watch the 1A championship game. And this should be a good one. I mean, like Matt Sag against Southside's triple option ground game. And really Southside has been so good on defense this year. They've done it in the trenches, and that's what they're going to have to stop Fort Cherry's offense, because Fort Cherry's given up some points really only to Bishop Canavan this year. Canavan's been the only team to exploit them, but with the size Southside has on the ground or in the trenches and on the ground to just ground and pound the ball, this one has the potential to be a shootout too, because both these teams can score. I mean, Matt Seg can score anytime he touches the ball, so it's going to be a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. And but I mean, in the same vein, I really like Fort Cherry here, and quite honestly, it's hard for me to imagine that they're not going to make it to Cumberland Valley, but that's just me.
Yeah, and speaking of the 1A bracket as it shapes up, we've got the WPIAL champion would then face the winner of Red Bank Valley and Cambridge Springs. Red Bank Valley out of District 9 made it to a state championship game a couple years ago. They beat Bishop Canavan in a semifinal. But if I recall in that game, Canavan was driving for the go-ahead touchdown and threw an interception that Red Bank Valley ran back like 90 yards for a touchdown to pretty much put that game away. But nevertheless, I do like the WPIAL champions' chances against either of those teams, whether it's Red Bank or Cambridge Springs. And then out east, Steel High's kind of the dominant force as they've been in single A the last couple of years that could potentially get them forced up into 2A depending on how things shake out. But I think the other story here is South Williamsport won the District 4 title out of, I think they were the number 3 or number 4 seed. They beat Canton and Muncie, who were both ranked in my rankings. So it was a pretty impressive run for South Williamsport there too.
Steel High has to go to Lackawanna Trail this week. That's a tale of two undefeated teams butting heads, just like, Fort Cherry and Southside Beaver. So that's going to be really interesting. Steel High was tested. They were held scoreless in the first. It was a scoreless tie last week with Steel High and Northern Bedford. So, I thought that was, good for Steel High to kind of taste the fact that they're not just going to show up and win, that they're going to have to go out there and play good football. And that they played a good second half. But I think in the same vein as I talked earlier with 3A, I think that you've almost got two state semifinals going on here right now. The Steel High, Lackawanna Trail, and then Fort Cherry, Southside Beaver. I think that those four teams are, kind of the top four teams in 1A in the state.
Yeah, I don't disagree. My rankings are very similar with South Williamsport up there, but South Williamsport got those two big wins recently over Canton and Muncie, which definitely helped their rankings as well.
Yeah.
All right, so looking at the WPIAL finalists on the whole, all 12 of them, Aliquip is here for the 33rd time in their history. They've got 19 titles, which is the most out of any school. North Allegheny got their 6th WPIAL title, and Peters Township got their 1st, as we talked about, which was pretty cool. And the one other thing that I think is noteworthy here is that 8 of the 12 teams that made it this far last year also made it this year. So we've, 5 of the 6 defending champs made it, and 3 out of the 6 runners up made it. And those 3 produced 3 rematches. That we got a rematch of Central Catholic and North Allegheny in 6A. We've got a rematch of Bell Vernon and Avonworth in 3A, and we've got a rematch of Steel Valley Beaver Falls in 2A. So those 3 championship rematches are certainly noteworthy to see how those results play out. But as we talked about, going back to the very beginning of the year, the preview show that we did, the summary you gave was that this season in Pennsylvania is about the usual suspects, and can the usual suspects do it again? That we felt like the typical powerhouses were still the powerhouses, and I think that's kind of played out as the season's gone on. We've seen a couple of different teams, Southside Beaver, Fort Cherry's made their way in. Peters Township missed the playoffs last year and then won a WPIAL title, but for the most part,
it's been the usual suspects.
Yeah, 8 of the 12 teams that were here last year are here again. So
yep, I would consider that to be usual suspects.
All right. Another thing that we like to keep an eye on here is the public versus private, because I know there's a bit of a debate statewide. So I always like to kind of track these numbers and just kind of see how it plays out. This year, Central Catholic was the only non-boundary school or private school that made a WPIAL championship game. So, a few years ago, back in 2021, there was a big hullabaloo and to do about, 5 private school teams made the WPIAL championship game. Something's got to change. We need separate playoffs, all that stuff. And I said on the show at the time, and I said it on Twitter, I said it to other people, that, this year's an aberration. Like, you had schools that year like Sarah Catholic, Bishop Canavan, North Catholic that were appearing in either like their 2nd championship game in school history, or were appearing for the first time since 1990, that, it wasn't a typical thing that you see those teams every year appearing at this level. And I think we, looking holistically now at 8 years worth of data of the 6 classification era,
it's almost a non-factor when you
the one, that 2021 year where 5 teams made it is clearly the outlier. That, typically it's 1 or 2. That year just happened to be a alignment of stars where these teams had historic seasons that they hadn't had before. So looking at the WPIAL versus statewide, slightly more non-boundary schools making the quarterfinal round here that made the WPIAL championships, and then over the 6 classification era. Statewide, it is a bit more of the private schools are making it this far into the playoffs, where in these 8 years, it's been about 15% of the WPIAL schools have been private schools that have made the championship games, versus statewide making the quarterfinals has been about 21% of schools. So overall, just like to present the data and keep track of this. It's something we keep an eye on, because we know it's an ongoing debate statewide about whether there should or should not be separate private school playoffs, but just some interesting statistics to make of it what you will.
Yeah, interesting statistics, and we're just going to leave it at that.
Yeah, I just say, make of it what you will. I'm just throwing the data out there.
Yep.
All right. So another fun stat that I like to keep track of is all-time wins at Heinz Field and Acrisure Stadium.
Oh,
So the Steelers and Pitt obviously have the most.
is
The
this
Ravens
about like my top 5? This is your like top 5, regardless of classification, put into winning percentage or something like that, huh?
Well,
This is a good. This is
I'm
good.
just pointing out that the Ravens beat the Steelers at Heinz Field or Acrisure Stadium, whatever it is, last year, which was their 10th win. But other than the two teams where it's their home stadium, these WPIAL teams have done better than pretty much everybody else that plays there. Like, and the WPIAL teams are not guaranteed to play there every year. Like, they have to win a bunch to get there. The Ravens, the Bengals, the Browns, they have guaranteed games there every year. And, Clairton's won more games than the Bengals and the Browns have.
Yeah, but it does come down to the fact that, those teams are good, that are playing there, where the Steelers don't necessarily. I mean, it's just like whatever the Steelers are like that year. I mean, the teams that are playing there that you've got those lofty winning percentages are good teams that have to earn their way there, not regular season teams like the Steelers, Pitt, and the Ravens. But
that's true. I was just looking at overall total number of wins, though, right? Like the Ravens have won 10 games at Heinz Field in their history. They've played there 37 times, whereas Clairton's won 9 games and only played there 10 times. So, and Aliquippa can get to that 9 total if they beat McKeesport this year. Yeah.
Very good, rather meaningless statistics, but entertaining.
Yes, very. Since I know we've got Aliquippa people that watch the show, your takeaway here is that if Aliquippa wins, they'll have more wins at the Steelers Stadium than everyone other than the Steelers, Pitt, and the Baltimore Ravens. So
if there's one thing that I think people can agree upon that watches the WPIAL Blitz Show podcast, it's that it's entertaining. So thanks, Ian. Entertaining because of you, my friend.
Entertaining and informative is what we go for. Also, we took a few weeks off from this because this is our last football history look back of the season. So I saved this one for WPIAL Championship weekend. The 10 years ago, the WPIAL champions were Central Catholic beating Woodland Hills. That Woodland Hills team had Miles Sanders at running back, a name you should know. West Allegheny beat Central Valley in the AAA championship. South Fayette beat Aliquippa in one of the greatest WPIAL championship games ever. And then North Catholic, my alma mater, beat Stowe Rocks in a bit of an upset. It was considered at the time to win the WPIAL title. And then South Fayette and North Catholic would go on to win state titles as well. So looking at those two, this was a kind of budding rivalry back then, a decade ago, between South Fayette and Aliquippa. South Fayette beat them to win the 2010 championship and then again in 2013. And then they would face off again the next 2 years in 2014 and 2015 in WPIAL championship games. South Fayette won this one on a late touchdown that was just back and forth all game between them and Aliquippa, and then went on to win the state title as well. The Brumbaugh brothers were a bit of a force. Christian Brumbaugh was the older one. He came through first at South Fayette. He was part of that 2010 championship team. And then Luke Brumbaugh was the middle brother. He played at Seton LaSalle because his younger brother, Brett Brumbaugh, wound up breaking the WPIAL passing record that had been set by his older brother, Christian, en route to South Fayette winning the WPIAL title. So that was kind of a cool little family story that was happening back then. And I have to mention North Catholic's run to the state championship game. That it was their first WPIAL championship appearance in school history. Stowe Rocks had lost to Clairton the previous 2 years in the WPIAL championship, and those were the Clairton teams that had Tyler Boyd and Tarish Webb and Titus Howard. They called themselves the Killer T's. They won, 66 straight games, 4 straight state titles. But those guys all graduated after 2012. So everyone kind of thought like, oh, Stowe Rocks has this quarterback who's a D1 recruit. it's their turn now, right? And Stowe Rocks beat Clairton in the semifinals, and then North Catholic came in undefeated and just shut Stowe Rocks out in the WPIAL championship game, 14-0. PJ Fulmore, kind of a wildcat quarterback, really more of just a runner, but then went all the way to the state championship game and beat Old Forge in overtime. It was a 7-7 game. Old Forge scored a touchdown right before the first half ended to go up 7-0. North scored in the second half. Then in overtime, Old Forge scored first, kicked the extra point. North scored a touchdown and went for two. And this picture here is PJ Fulmore, the running back, running in the 2-point conversion to win the state title for North Catholic. Their only WPIAL championship and state championship in school history. And I had to show a picture of the North Catholic victory bell here because when I was in high school a decade before this, it was just gathering dust over in the corner because it was always, if you won a state title, you got to ring the bell. We hadn't won anything in any sport for a long time. Our girls basketball team was pretty good for a while, but hadn't won anything where we could ring the bell. And so I kind of started this hashtag on Twitter of, ring the bell, as North was running through the playoffs, and they went and won the WPIAL title, went and rang the bell, and then they won the state title and rang the bell as well. So that was a pretty cool
Good
piece
stuff,
of
man.
North Catholic history there.
Good stuff.
We've been on for a long time tonight.
We have.
Thanks for everyone who's joined us and stuck with us through it. I think we've had a fair number of people stay with us. I mean,
it's been very consistent.
Yeah. So thank you. Hope you've been entertained and informed. That's always our goal, is to be entertaining and informative. If you like listening to me talk, you can check out the Steelers podcast I'm on, the Steel City Blitz podcast. We're actually recording on Tuesday night this week, so tune in tomorrow night. A little bit different vibe there. Our shtick is like, four guys sitting around drinking whiskey talking about the Steelers. So there'll be a lot of swearing on the show this week. So if you want to hear me swear about the Steelers, tune in tomorrow night around 10 o'clock to the Steel City Blitz podcast. You can check us out on YouTube or any other podcasting platform. We do it live and video and all that stuff too. So you've got your Fresh Set of Down show, which we'll probably do a joint show again this year as we get to the state title game.
Yeah, we are. We got to figure out how we transition into the Cumberland Valley show that we'll do to close it out. But Tim Roken from St. Joe Prep joined us. And he actually reminisced about that win over Central Catholic on the show that you just showed up on screen or whatever like that. That was his first win, I believe. But myself, Bob Long, Dave Micah, we're talking everything about, everything of what's going on the eastern side of the state. That's how come I can answer all these questions that Ian is asking me, because I've already researched them on my show that I did before this one. So
it's all good. It's all good. That's why we do this, right? It's all about being
exactly right.
Yeah. Entertaining and informative. That's our thing.
Absolutely.
So thanks everyone for joining us and tuning in. You obviously know where to find us. And we certainly appreciate everyone chatting it up and all the support, the retweets on Twitter. And I've had a couple people reach out to me and be like, hey, I really enjoyed the show. Like, coaches and things like that like I am shocked that people watch the show and listen to the almost 2 hours of content that we put out every week. And
it goes by quick. I mean, my God, the only reason why I know it's 2 hours is because I can't feel my feet. But
you've been a trooper out there on the deck here, in the cold weather, football weather conditions there. But I certainly enjoy the holiday decorum you've got going.
Yeah, that was brand new. I mean, I saw that in the house today. I'm going like, hey, that's going to be great for the show. So brought that out here. But, I can't thank all the fans, enough, Ian. I mean, it really energizes us to, just talk about what we enjoy most. And that is, really showcasing all these teams and athletes that are playing high school football here in Pennsylvania. I mean, we have a passion for it. It comes across, hopefully. I think it does. And, we're glad that people enjoy to watch.
Yeah. And thanks to Tom from the Erie Times News for joining us tonight as well. He was a great guest. And, like I say every week, I just love talking football. Like I could do this for 3 more hours just because I love talking football so much.
I did for more than 3 hours tonight.
You did your other show, so you're good. But yeah, no, it's great. I love the opportunity to do this, and it's so much fun. And thanks to everyone who tunes in. And best of luck to everyone in the WPIAL championships this week.
And happy Thanksgiving.
Yes. Have a great Thanksgiving, everyone.
Everybody. All right. And enjoy those WPIAL championships. Okay.
And for those of you playing in championships, enjoy practicing on Thanksgiving morning, because that is kind of the tradition of like, we're going to have fun and practice on Thanksgiving morning. One of the coaches said, I don't remember who it was, might have been Matt Humbert at Belle Vernon, that said like Thanksgiving practice is his favorite because it means you're playing for something meaningful. So enjoy it. Have a good week. All of our fans have a good Thanksgiving, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah. See you next week, man. Thanks for